As the green grass is poking up, how do we manage our grazing with uncertainty of drought?
Limiting the duration of the grazing period to create a longer recovery period. That's what really helps, rangeland, both in normal rainfall conditions and in a drought situation.
Jim Gerrish, grazing consultant and speaker with American Grazing Lands, LLC, is my guest to offer advice for grazing during this spring and summer with the uncertainty of drought. Plus, we'll also touch on grazing under a pivot on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we're back here again with another episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us here on our program today. Glad to have you along for the ride today. This is episode 64, and it's a program that I know a lot of folks across the country, no matter where you're at, probably weighing in on your mind a little bit. Is this drought going to persist, or are we going to see it break? We are seeing, nevertheless, that for some areas of the country, it's not breaking as soon as we would like it to. There is some places that have seen some moisture. We've talked with meteorologist Don Day about that, and he's going to share more today at the last segment of our program today, as he always does on our weather outlook. But when we are in this time of the year, and I know the green grass is sprouting up, it varies from the southern climates all the way up into the northern tier and up into Canada. I know you folks in the south are a little bit further ahead than I am here in northeastern Wyoming. Nevertheless, the grass is starting to green up a little bit, and what moisture is in the ground is getting that grass growing. But is this drought going to persist? And with that in mind, then comes the grazing, and how do we manage in that? If the drought does break, how do we manage that? Today, my guest is Jim Gerrish. He's a grazing expert, consultant, and speaker. He's with his own company called American Grazing Lands Services, LLC. He's going to visit with us about this situation that we find ourselves in here in this odd time of the year, not only with the year, but in the fact that we've had drought for a lot of folks for 2 years. And I know the Southern Plains part of the country has been real dry and dealing with fires in states like Texas and Oklahoma, Kansas, and Colorado. And so I just know that this time of the year, how is this going to play out, and how do I manage my grazing? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Also, of course, the captain, Tim O'Byrne, will be by in just a few moments for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. And meteorologist Don Day, as I was just saying just a moment ago, will join us in our very last segment. Not only are we going to talk about the weather outlook for the first part of April, but also it's going to give us an update on what La Nina is doing, and are we breaking out of that? We're going to talk about that in our last segment today with meteorologist Don Day. Right now, I do want to take a quick look to our bull sale calendar and remind you, we do have a couple sales on our calendar. Don't forget also, another good spot to go and see everything that's going on for bull sales is the Working Ranch magazine. We have a complete list of all of the sales across the country. Take a look at that. But here is what I have on my calendar here for the Working Ranch Radio Show as Jorgensen Land and Cattle with their 50th annual bull sale. That's coming up Monday, April 11th. That's going to be at 1 p.m. there at the ranch at Ideal, South Dakota. They'll be selling about 175 head of registered Angus bulls. You can find out more. Go to their website at jorgensenfarms.com. That sale will also be carried on DV auction. Might also point out, if you're looking for bulls to lease, might want to give them a call as well, because that's another program that they offer. Also on our sale calendar, DLCC Ranch with their 30th annual production sale. That's going to be on Saturday, April 16th there at the ranch at Pierres, Minnesota. Now, if you're looking for some South Devon or South Devon influenced composite bulls, this is the sale you're going to want to watch. They have over 90 head selling. If you'd like to find out more, go to their website at dlccranch.com, and that will also be on Superior's Click to Bid. Right now, thanks to our sponsors of the Working Ranch Radio Show, the American Simmental Association. And boy, we are right in the middle of bull buying season. And whether you're looking at maternal traits or terminal traits, the genetic merit of Simmental Genetics has provided increased profitability to the rancher. Sim Genetics, profit through science. Find out more at simmental.org. Bobcat, one tough tractor. Visit bobcat.com to find out more. The American Hereford Association, come home to Hereford. and the North American Limousine Foundation. Limousine cattle deliver to your bottom line. And like I said before, this is bull buying season, and the American Angus Association reminds you, if you're looking for registered Angus bulls, look for that registration number. Buy the power and buy registered Angus bulls. Well, it's time now to check in with the captain, publisher, and editor of Working Ranch Magazine for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. A few days back, I took a couple hours in the afternoon and recertified myself in the Beef Quality Assurance Feed Yard module. I got to tell you, it's been now for this like 4 years since I've done it, and it's quite a bit different program today than it was 4 years ago. It's much more refined, much more interesting. I learned a lot, trust me. It takes you right from one end of the spectrum to the other, even just in the feed yard manual. So it's really good. I encourage every single one of you listeners to go on bqa.org and hook up with the cow-calf module for sure, the feed yard module for sure, and the transportation one wouldn't hurt you either. Go on, check it out. And Justin, last week's program, you talked about blockchaining, and I want folks to go back. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit. I want you to go back, folks, and listen to that one. The take-home message there was blockchaining allows the transaction to be completed immediately. In other words, you do not relinquish control of your thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of live animals to somebody and then hoping a check is going to show up in 2 or 3 days. That doesn't happen. All right, with blockchain. Justin, run it by him again, and I know this is going to be a great show. Stick around.
You bet. Thanks, Captain. And absolutely, last week's show was on blockchain technology. Steve Lupine out of the University of Wyoming was my guest. And I'll tell you, I don't know if I can do it justice to just sit here and try to explain it in a few short seconds about how that works. But I would invite you to go and listen to last week's episode 63. And there's an example in there that I think really kind of drove it home about trading baseball cards. That I think if you hear that analogy, you'll understand kind of how that works. And I'll just probably leave it there with that, because that's quite a show of a lot of good information about blockchain technology. Well, stay with us. Coming up next, Jim Gerrish will be joining us. We're going to be talking about grazing during this time of the year when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Starting off in the right direction is essential to gaining an advantage later when you go to market your calves. And I have proof that the right direction is with Sim Angus sired calves. A 2020 study by K-State showed that Sim Angus sired steer calves earn more at sale time than all other breed identified sire groups, with at least 50 lots represented on Superior Livestock's 2020 summer sales. The proof's right there. For low-risk, high-potential calves with earning potential, be confident that Sim Genetics will give you more per head, period. Stand strong, Simmental. Your answer to a hassle-free breeding season is as easy as one call to Jorgensen Land and Cattle of Ideal, South Dakota. This year, Jorgensen celebrates their 50th anniversary bull sale on Monday, April 11th at the ranch. They'll be selling 175 head of registered Angus bulls out of the great sires like Eldorado, Rito, Traveler, Emulations, and the largest offering of Emulus line bulls. Don't forget, Jorgensen's also offer a hassle-free bull leasing program that features excellent genetics while minimizing your risk. It's the 50th anniversary bull sale for Jorgensen Land and Cattle, Monday, April 11th at 1 p.m. at the ranch in Ideal, South Dakota. For information or sale catalog, go to jorgensenfarms.com. The sale will also be available on DV Auction. Jorgensen Land and Cattle, helping cattlemen build better cow herds for over 60 years. And we welcome you back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Before the break, the captain was talking about last week's episode on blockchain technology. That was episode 63. I might point out that we have really had some great shows, some great guests here to start out 2022 and to kick things off. And if you want to go back and listen to some of those shows, you can go to any podcast provider out there or just search in your web browser under Working Ranch Radio Show, and we're going to show up there. The episode before that that one was Why Own Cows? And that's kind of a play on words, but I would encourage you to go and listen to that one. We also did a show on marketing your cattle in 2022, weather outlook for 2022, and then one on have you thought about running sheep? Those are just a few of the topics that we've already covered. Go back and take a listen to those if you got a chance. Well, let's get on to our show here today as Jim Gerrish with American Grazing Lands is joining us. He is a grazing expert, consultant, and speaker with American Grazing Land Services, and bringing him in to talk about this odd time of the year as the grass is starting to green up a little bit, and how do we manage our grazing in light of drought? Is it going to persist and so forth, and as we come out of that as well. So, Jim, I want to thank you for joining us. I believe this is the first time I've had you on our show, so welcome to the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with your audience, Justin.
You know, a lot of folks, probably some folks are familiar with you, with what you've been doing. And so I guess when I looked at this topic that I wanted to explore of a lot of guys have been in a 2-year drought, and there's no necessarily certainty that we're going to be coming out of it this year. But as we prepare for spring and into summer, what are some of the things from your perspective that we need to be working with and thinking about as we move out of this time frame and into the spring of the year?
Okay, there's 3 things that really come to mind for me when we're dealing with a drought situation, especially a prolonged drought situation like this. The first one is simply animal numbers. When we have a drought, obviously we don't have near as much feed, and so destocking is something that pretty well every ranch needs to be doing or have already done in face of a drought, because if you're short on grass and you try to keep too many cattle, you just further aggravate what's going on with your pasturing range and the soils underneath them. So proper stocking rate for the condition is fundamental. Ongoing monitoring of your feed supply. It's easy to count bales in the stack yard. Once you've acquired the skill, it's actually about as easy to assess how much feed you have in the pasture. And if everything, we're getting close to the green up season now, and if everything was grazed off last fall and over the winter, and there's no residual forage out there, you absolutely have to avoid, the temptation to get out there as soon as you see some green, because it's going to need some recovery time. And then the third factor is, just simply reading that rain gauge, monitoring how much moisture you are getting. And, kind of guideline I work with people is if your pastures are in a healthy, productive state, the reduction in rainfall, like if you're getting 30% less rain than a normal year, you're going to have 30% less forage available than in a normal year. If, on the other hand, the pastures have already been severely grazed and, abused, then the reduction forage in the current year is going to be about double what the reduction in moisture is. So if you have that 30% reduction in rainfall, it's going to translate to about a 60% reduction in, feed supply. There's people who have been 2 years in a drought, and if they've already pushed their pasture range to the limit, it's going to be really reduced this year.
Mm-hmm. You talked about the folks that's been in a 2-year drought. So as we come out of that, and let's just say on average that we're just going to get maybe our average rainfall, and let's not try to talk about maybe percentages above or below, but we're just going to be looking or anticipating around an average rainfall. Recovery phase, is it going to take 1 to 2 years to get fully back? I mean, how would you recover out of that from a time frame on just if you figured you were to get your average rainfall for the next 1 to 2 years?
Okay, that's an interesting question for your audience, because I have to presume that you've got listeners across a pretty wide geographic area. So for the people who don't know, I've lived and worked in Missouri for 23 years, where our natural precipitation average was between 38 and 40 inches. Mm-hmm. And if we had if 2021 had been a drought year for us, but we were getting normal precipitation, at this time of the year in March and rolling into April, you just about wouldn't see any lingering effect of that drought, because that kind of environment, it's very forgiving. Mm-hmm. Where we live in Idaho now, our historic average precipitation is a little under 8 inches.
Oh, man.
And you're in an environment like that, we are 2 years of solid drought behind us, and no indication that we're going to get any break this year. We're below normal snowfall right now, and it's going to be at a minimum a full year at normal precipitation to have rangeland in this kind of environment recover. And it's going to be a year if in the last 2 years we did not overuse that rangeland. If the range has been overused for a couple of years, then it could be 2 or even 3 years before the plant community really recovers there. Mm-hmm. If we don't have normal precipitation, I see very little recovery going to happen this year.
Mm-hmm. A bit ago, you were talking about when grass starts to green up, there's that temptation to put cows out or go ahead and just kind of get back on that. And after we have been in a 1 to 2 year drought situation, you cautioned a little bit about that. But I want to explore a little bit, because at some point, those cows are going to, wherever they're at, they're going to want to go to green grass. I mean, they like that. They want to do that. So how do we manage this time of the year? For myself, my pastures we're 2 years done. I don't have any stockpile left, really. And so they're going to go to this green grass. How do we prevent any continual damage?
Okay. The criteria, that a lot of range management people look at as when is this grass ready to be grazed is beyond 3 leaf stage. So this is part of monitoring your feed supply, is actually evaluating what the growth stage of the grass is. And so when we say 3 leaf stage, that means 3 fully extended leaves per tiller of grass. And a fully extended leaf is when the collar forms. A leaf actually has 3 components. Mm-hmm. There's the blade, where all the photosynthetic activity is taking place. There's the sheath, which is where the leaf is wrapped around the stem, and where those two come together is the collar. It's that little hinge-like area there. And once the collar forms, that leaf is fully extended. So that leaf is not going to grow anymore beyond that. Mm-hmm. And from a carbohydrate balance in the plant, whether when we have fewer than 3 leaves, the grass plant may still be drawing more energy from storage than it's getting from active photosynthesis. And when we get past 3 leaves, then there's enough energy being generated on a daily basis from photosynthesis to support both additional growth of that plant and put carbohydrates in reserve. People talk about root storage, mm-hmm. but in grasses, it's not really so much root storage as stem bases, the lowest part of the plant above ground. That's where a lot of energy is stored, particularly in bunch grasses. So the key that we would be looking at to say, okay, the cows can go out now, would be a minimum of 3 leaf stage. Ideally, if we could wait until 4 or 5 leaves were out there, that's what recovery is actually about. That's what it's going to take to get, the range back into pastures, back into good health. And if you're in, a managed grazing system and have multiple pastures that you go through, you would be, you will have evaluated the pasture right now, and as it's greening up, and the places that look the hardest hit from the previous years of drought, we want to delay going to those pastures as long as we can so they have the opportunity to get out to 4 or 5 leaves. And we'll look for, the 2-3 pastures that have the best residual, look like they're going to take off and, be better than your other pastures. Those are the ones that we would graze first.
Jim Gerrish is my guest today with American Grazing Lands. We're talking about grazing in this time of the year where the grass is starting to green up, and there's uncertainty as far as whether this drought will persist, and also the fact that we have been in a drought, and how do we manage our grazing with that in mind. When we come back, Jim, the question I want to talk about, the topic is this time of the year. I've heard folks refer to it as free grass time of the year, free grazing, and I want to explore that subject a little bit more when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Today's profit-minded rancher is all about a balanced operation, and when it comes to buying bulls, you look for balanced genetics that utilize the advantages of heterosis. For decades, DLCC Ranch is focused on utilizing the strengths of one of the most feed-efficient breeds in the world, South Devon. This British breed simply provides a proven outcross for a commercial or purebred herd that exploits the benefits of heterosis in both terminal and maternal traits like growth, carcass, and stayability. This year, DLCC will be offering over 90 head of South Devon and South Devon Influence composite bulls at their sale on Saturday, April 16th. All bulls will be genomically tested, and they come with a 3-year guarantee. They will also be offering over 50 head of females ranging from elite heifers to replacement heifers and fall pairs. For more information or to request a catalog, go to dlccranch.com. It's the DLCC 30th Annual Production Sale, Saturday, April 16th at the ranch near Pierres, Minnesota, or on Superior's Click to Bid. DLCC, committed to providing South Devon crossbreeding solutions and outcross genetics to commercial cattlemen.
At the American Akaushi Association, we're more than prime. The American Akaushi Association was created to help ranchers be more profitable and find opportunities when using Akaushi genetics in their herd. We focus on market opportunities for our members and offer support from conception to consumer. When you choose Akaushi, you have a network right there with you. Experience the difference at akaushi.com. That's AKAUSHI.com.
Welcome back here again to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. My guest today, Jim Gerrish, grazing expert and speaker with American Grazing Lands out of May, Idaho. Jim, I don't think I mentioned that earlier, that was where you reside or work out of, but I know, I'm sure folks kind of got that gist when you talked about the fact that you're grazing some of the things that you do in Idaho. Nevertheless, folks, if you're just joining us, we have been talking about how to manage our grazing in this time of the year with spring and preparing for summer. In addition to the fact we've been in drought, is the drought going to persist? But that's what we have been talking about. And Jim, I want to kind of keep in the concept of how do we manage grazing for the spring of the year. But with that in mind, I've also heard it referred to as the free grass period or the free grazing period. And I wanted to ask your opinion on that topic. And is that a myth? Is that just something folks like to believe in, or is there some legitimacy to that statement?
I think this really depends on, again, looking at this geographic situation. If in the higher moisture areas, you can, put the cattle out with no control of grazing and, pretty well let them go anywhere they want. And then when the grasses go into the elongation phase, that's when, when the seed heads are, before they emerge, but, the stem's beginning to elevate, that's when you bring them back under control, go to a higher stock density, concentration, and the strategy for the reason for doing that what you're trying to do is actually get the seed heads bitten out.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, in a productive environment, again, going back to Missouri, we grazed 4, 5, 6 times there, and every one was on a new flush of grass coming. In the drier environment, there's a lot of emphasis about not biting the growing point off. And this is a little backwards from the way a lot of people think.
Mm-hmm.
I think controlled grazing on rangeland probably has more value for the health and vigor of the range than what it does even in a productive environment. And the reason for that is we have such a small window of time to actually grow our grass on rangeland that managing it from the very outset, limiting the duration of the grazing period to create a longer recovery period, that's what really helps, rangeland, both in normal rainfall conditions and in a drought situation. And I say rangeland, but we also have rangeland extending from, southern New Mexico, Arizona, up to, northern Montana,
Mm-hmm.
the Canadian border. And so there is a great difference in the length of the growing season, based just on, temperature. But whether we're at the Canadian border or the Mexican border, the rainfall season is limited in both of those environments, and you might have days warm enough to continue growing grass, in August, September, even into October. But if the moisture is all come in April, May, and June,
Mm-hmm.
You're going to grow 80+% of your forage in April, May, and June. And so it's a matter of allowing as much to grow as possible and then rationing it out through the remainder of your grazing season. And, for some outfits, that remainder of the grazing season is the other 9 months of the year.
Yeah.
It is, July to March of outside of the really productive growing season.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have a growing season that is that limited, that short, you want to capitalize on growing good grass on as many acres as you can.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about rainfall now because this, as you said, this is going to go out to a lot of different folks all across the country. We're dealing with everything from, I think, your range that you talked about, what you're dealing with in Idaho for amount of rainfall to what you grew up with or was around in Missouri. I mean, that's very different. And so let's talk about, as you meet with folks and you sit down with guys on a consultation basis and you look at rainfall, what's the conversations that you have about rainfall and looking at it from their particular area?
Okay. A big thing about rainfall is if it falls on your land and it all runs off, it's not very valuable. So it's really about vegetation management, keeping a good cover of residual out there after grazing. We talk about litter on the soil surface to keep the soil cooler, allow water to infiltrate. Very often in the high rainfall environments, I say our number one priority with grazing management is capturing as much solar energy as possible. I think the number one priority of grazing management on rangeland is capturing as much water as possible. So in a rangeland environment, we are really focused on post-grazing residual and building litter to try to keep more water on the landscape and allowing it to infiltrate into the soil. So those are really key things that we try to teach ranchers about is how do you maximize the capture and retention of water on your land.
what's the levels or the benchmarks amounts that I know, under a certain, under 12 inches of rain or 11 inches, it would be considered a desert? And what are those amounts as we work through that from low to high, and then how that affects your ability? For example, in range areas where we're out here in lower rainfall areas, you'll get maybe the one graze. If you have a great year, you might get the opportunity on some good pastures to go back twice. But let's talk about those benchmarks, those levels and rainfall, and how that correlates to rainfall amounts and how many grazing periods that enacts.
Okay. So I kind of use about 25 inches as the break point between calling something a wet productive environment and calling it rangeland. Now, the further north you go, the lower that number actually is. Further south you go, it might be even higher than 25, but I kind of use 25 inches. Mm-hmm. And if you live in an environment with less than 25 inches, we generally recommend one grazing event per 10 inches of precipitation. So if you're living at a 10-inch rainfall environment, we would expect pretty well the entire ranch is going to be once a year grazing. If you're at a 6 to 8 inch rainfall environment, we would recommend 20 to 40% of your acres get a full year beyond the recovery that happens in the current grazing season. Mm-hmm. We're going to recommend that the following growing season, I should say, 20 to 40% of the acres don't get grazed at all. That is to, try to keep some health and vigor in the range. And also it does give you a buffer. So, if you defer use on some acres for that year, for a full following season, in the third season we might be talking about, you've got some buffer there. If that is going to be a dry year, you have grown some additional feed. Now, if we go the other direction on precipitation, and let's say you get 15 inches of precipitation, well, that would be 1.5 grazings. So what does that mean? Is we will probably graze, everything will get grazed once, and then 50% of the acres will get a second grazing. And very often that second grazing is a dormant season grazing, but it might possibly be pastures that you grazed lightly at the beginning of the season, just as green up was happening. Mm-hmm. Towards the tail end of the season, you might come back and, graze those a second time. And then we just work up from there to at 25 inches, that would be 2.5 grazings. Now, beyond 25 inches, we drop the guideline to one grazing event per 7 inches of rainfall. Okay. And the further north we go, it'll drop down to 5, because an inch of water will grow more grass at a northern latitude than it will at a southern latitude. And that's because of, during the growing season, the very long day lengths we have up north. And then also because the temperatures in general are lower, there's less evaporative loss of water. A 15-inch rainfall in southwest Texas might still only support one grazing a year. A 15-inch rainfall environment in Alberta might be 3 grazing cycles a year.
Yeah, interesting. Well, stay with us. We're going to continue with our guest today, Jim Gerrish with American Grazing Lands out of May, Idaho, has been our guest today. We've been talking about grazing this time of the year with the uncertainty of drought, and also just in general, spring time of the year as well. When we come back, though, we're going to pick his brain on another topic that he has quite a bit of experience in, and that is grazing under a pivot. We're going to talk about it when we return with my guest today, Jim Gerrish with American Grazing Lands on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
If you could do something today that would bring you a profit tomorrow, would you do it? In the cattle business, it's about efficiency. And with Limousine genetics in your herd, your profit is just one calf crop away. With Limousine or Limplex cattle, it's more pounds naturally to sell at weaning. It's growth and feed efficiency with the added benefit of carcass merit. The other side of the profit coin with Limousine genetics is the maternal efficiency, docility, and longevity of your cows and bulls. It's as simple as Limousine today, profit tomorrow.
Sale season's here again, and there are a lot of black-hided Angus bulls on the market, but not all of them are registered. Why take the risk? Don't gamble on unproven genetics. Invest wisely with registered, powered by Angus bulls. Backed by the power of the American Angus Association and 80 million data points, registered Angus bulls give you the confidence in your buying decisions. Don't buy an imposter. Look for the registration number. Buy the power. Buy registered Angus bulls.
We welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills, and I hate to sound kind of repetitive here, but I know that so many of our shows have a lot of information kind of packed into this time slot, and so want to remind you that if you search under your web browser under Working Ranch Radio Show or any podcast provider out there as well, you will find us, and you can go back and you can listen to these shows as well. You can share them whatever you want to do with them, and I just want to put that out there one more time. I want to get back to our guest today, Jim Gerrish with American Grazing Land Services out of May, Idaho. He's a grazing expert, consultant, and speaker. And Jim, I want to talk about another thing that you have been doing for quite a few years that has intrigued me, and that is grazing under a pivot. So I want you to explain your operation, kind of how that works.
Okay. First, I'll describe how our grazing cell is set up. On each pivot, we only have 3 permanent fences, but we do a daily rotation. I mean, the cattle are moved to fresh piece of the pie every day. And so what we have, and our permanent fences are 2-wire electrified high tensile. So there's a permanent fence around the outside perimeter of the pivot. And then we have a second circular fence, near circular fence, that's halfway between the pivot center and the outer reach.
Okay. And
then our water troughs or stock water points are on that inner circle fence.
Okay. Yep.
All right. Most people, if they've been haying, pivots for years, and they say, I'm going to switch to grazing, their first thought is to just put a water tank at the pivot center because you already have water there.
Yeah.
And then run pie pieces from the center to the outside of the outside perimeter. When you do that, it really hammers the ground towards the pivot center. And I'm not talking about, just 10 yards out from the pivot center where that tank is. I'm talking for the 100 yards out from the pivot center. I mean, if it's a standard, quarter section pivot, we've got 1,320 feet distance there, and they hammer, close to water, and they don't graze near severely out there, a quarter mile. Now, a lot of rangeland, cowboys think that, cows will graze, a couple miles out from a water tank without a problem, and then you go out there and you actually look at it and measure, and beyond a half a mile, you start seeing less and less use in it. 2 miles from the tank, it's way less. And so they think, a quarter mile on a pivot, of course they'll walk that far. How can they not graze that uniformly? But they don't. And so by putting that inner circle fence out there, we cut the travel distance to water in half, and it gives much more uniformity of grazing. Now, I said we had 3 permanent fences, and I've only described 2. We also have a single wire fence that connects the inner and outer circle, and that's just an electrical conduit, so that one energizer, can run everything. You can take a polywire reel, hook it on either run it from the outside fence towards the inside, or vice versa, because we have power out there, you don't have to be thinking about where you hook your reel to, have power and then go to a dead fence with the reel itself.
Yeah.
Our soils, we are gravelly loam on top of river cobble. So we have real well-drained soils there, and we actually water over the top of the cattle. If they're on the inside circle at a real high stock density, I might turn the pivot off and run it over them dry, then turn it back on. But on any paddock on the outside circle, we just water over the top of the cattle. If on the other hand, you're on a clay loam soil or a silty clay, if it's got the word clay in the soil texture description, you do not want to water over the top of your cattle. If it has sand in the name, yes, you probably can, but try it and see what the impact is. And if you don't like the impact you're seeing, then you don't want to water over the top of them. But it's on any type of clay soil, you don't want to water over the top of them, and ideally you're actually going to be drying out a day ahead of the move that you're making.
Sure.
And that's the really only tricky part of grazing under pivots, is knowing your soil drainage. And our biggest pivot is 300 acres. And that is not the same soil type all the way across there.
Yeah.
And so there are some areas we got to be a little more, attentive to, especially on the inside circle, making sure that we've turned the water off as we're going over. Whereas the majority of it, though, we just run right over the top of the cattle.
Next question on that, and we don't have a lot of time here, but what are you planting in there? What's the forage under those pivots?
Ours is all perennial, mixed grass and legume. I mean, there's the last time any seeding was done of actually, seeding grass was 2004. In 2006, we overseeded red, white, and Alsike clover across all of that. I'm not a big fan of alfalfa as a dominant legume for grazing. I much prefer clovers and birds foot trefoil. And that's, another whole long conversation about why that is. Yeah. But in 2006, we overseeded that clover. And to maintain those stands, I try to each year allow 1/3 of the pivot area to have at least a 60 to 65 day recovery period. On average, we're about 40-day average recovery on these. By allowing 60, 65, 70 days, we get natural reseeding of that the clover component. And so we've got real strong clover content in these pastures. That's where our nitrogen comes from. We basically don't use any commercial fertilizer on these, and we rely on the legumes to fix nitrogen, and then the high stock density grazing gives us real uniform dung and urine distribution to recycle the nitrogen through the animals. And like I said, 2006, so that's 16 years ago. We've had, clover persisting 16 years out there without reseeding. Yeah.
What's your rate that you're grazing? What's cows the acre? Are you doing pounds the acre? What are your grazing rates?
Okay. We in the spring, as it's greening up, we will be giving them a larger area, and we might be running a stock density of 30 to 40,000 pounds of live weight per acre. So if your cows weigh 1,300 pounds, that'd be 30 to 35 cows to the acre. After we've made the first cycle around everything, we'll be giving them smaller areas, and the density will go up. And once we get into full swing in the growing season, we're usually running 70 to 100,000 pound stock density. So, that's 50 to 70 cows to the acre on a daily move basis.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Jim, I want to thank you for joining us. We kind of have to stop in the middle of this. I know folks are going to think like, wow, we need to have you back to talk a little bit more about the pivot grazing, because I think that's something that, there's going to be more questions about it. And I know folks listening probably have a lot more questions about it, but I do appreciate you joining us here on our program today.
It's been my pleasure, and again, thank you for the opportunity.
And again, my guest today has been Jim Gerrish with American Grazing Lands. By the way, if you'd like to find out more information about him or to get a hold of him, you can go to his website at AmericanGrazingLands.com. Now, something to note, when you get there, you're going to find out it's more than just getting a hold of him. The American Grazing Lands is also a great resource for purchasing and buying electric fence material or watering fittings and various things of that nature that go kind of hand in hand with intensive grazing systems that are out there. So they also, if you have questions, they're a good resource to use as well. So AmericanGrazingLands.com is a website to go to. You can find out more information by visiting that website. Well, stay with us. When we come back, meteorologist Don Day joins us with a look at our long-term weather and an update on La Nina. We'll be back when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Living in the country means working in the country, and that calls for a tough tractor. Well, Bobcat has 15 models in its compact tractor lineup from 21 to 58 horsepower. With the help of your local Bobcat dealer, you'll find a perfect match for your property and to-do list. Get a look at all the different models at Bobcat.com, and while you're there, use the Build and Quote tool to design your ideal machine. Get yourself one tough tractor from one tough animal. Bobcat. Visit Bobcat.com.
Whoa, Herefords are the efficiency experts for a reason. In crossbreeding systems, Herefords boost pregnancy rates by 7% and add $30 per head in feed yard profitability. And Hereford genetics bring unrivaled hybrid vigor, longevity, and disposition. Now that'll stop you in your tracks. Come home to Hereford for more pounds, more calves, and more profit. Visit Hereford.org for a sale near you.
And we welcome you back to the Working Ranch Radio Show as we turn now towards a look at our long-term weather. And this time of the year, I know a lot of folks across the country, we've been in a couple years of drought situations. We're seeing fires down in Texas and Oklahoma, and even now I see some down in Colorado, and where everybody just kind of wondering, are we going to get this moisture? But Don, you're talking about April as we're heading into the month of April, looking to be a little bit messy, and the fact that there is going to be some moisture moving across. And you're seeing that. It's just we really can't have a hard time predicting it much past about 3 days.
Yeah, we're in that time of year where the fidelity and forecasting out more than 5 or 6 days is really, really tricky. This time of year, you just get more storms embedded in the jet stream. And the more systems that are in the system, so to speak, the harder it gets to forecast, because the more storm systems that are moving along, there's more for the models to try to keep track of. And a lot of times we get into timing problems where something that looks like will come, let's say, on a Saturday ends up coming on a Monday, and then that messes up the forecast for the next Wednesday. So we're kind of in that time of year. It's typical. It's not to be unexpected. Mm-hmm. But we're in a situation where the drought hole is so deep and so widespread that we just need to keep these systems coming, and we need to do this for the next 10 to 12 weeks to really help out everybody. Mm-hmm.
I want to get into talking a little bit about La Nina, because we know the weather systems, as you talked about, is going to bring some weather. There's some uncertainty just where it's at, but as that reflects back to La Nina and coming out of that, you've been watching that in the temperatures in that Pacific area. It's looking like in following your forecast, it's looking like we're coming out of that La Nina, but it's going to be slow.
Yeah, it is moving at a very slow slug-like speed. One thing that we're seeing is a very persistent area of cooler than average sea surface temperatures along the equator from South America, stretching out all the way to northeast of Australia. And it's just been very stubborn. There was a moment in February and early March to where it started to break down, only to kind of pick up again. And from all of our tools that we use to try to make a prediction on what those sea surface temperatures are doing, we continue to see a slow erosion of La Nina happening this summer. But, it's really about timing. So it's hanging on a little bit longer than expected. And if it continues to go through the rest of the spring, which we think it will, that does not bode well for a widespread wet spring for everybody that needs a widespread wet spring. What it means is the impacts of La Nina, which for many areas of the West and the Central it's a signal for below normal precipitation. Now, not for everybody, but the tendencies are there. And one thing we did take a look at is over the last 30 years, when we have these 2-year La Ninas, which tend to happen around every 10 or 11 years, historically, they are slow to move out. And the only one that we saw that was strong was in 1996 and 1997. That went to a very strong El Nino very quickly. But over the last 30 years, these longer lasting La Ninas tend to slowly fade before we go into what's called a neutral status, which is what we expect this summer, which means sometime by mid to late summer, those sea surface temperatures even out a little bit. And what this means is if we're going to get into a wetter pattern for the Western United States, that's going to be a little more consistent, a little more reliable, we've got to get out of this La Nina, go to neutral, and then hopefully in 2023 find ourselves in somewhere near an El Nino phase. And we expect that to happen. Problem is that this La Nina is hanging on long enough that I do think it's going to cut back on some of the spring precipitation for some parts of the Western United States. On the other side of the country, this pattern tends to bring above normal precipitation to the south central and southeastern United States, and that's exactly what's happening. There's some areas in the United States that are getting too much rain and some areas that aren't getting enough. Mm-hmm. If it would be easy to spread it out and make it even for everybody, we certainly could, but we can't.
Yeah. All right. Well, Don, thanks for joining us here on our program, giving us kind of an outlook here and especially an update on La Nina. Appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
Meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather for our program today. And if you're not a regular listener to our program, just want to remind you that he does provide us that long-term forecast for every show here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Well, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to put a wrap on this week's program, and I'll tell you what's in store for the next episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. We'll be back after this.
Do you have a young child, grandchild, niece, or nephew that loves the weather and wants to learn more? Day Weather has produced a children's weather journal full of weather facts, fun weather experiments, coloring pages, and pages to record weather observations for every season of the year. The weather journal is for ages 3 to 7 and designed to be fun and educational. The interactive weather projects are fun for the whole family to take part in. For only $10, the Day Weather Journal is a great gift idea for any occasion. Click on our Amazon link to order at dayweather.com.
Well, we packed a lot into this week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show, and I appreciate you joining us for the ride. This has been a production of Working Ranch Magazine, and if you'd like to get a hold of me, you can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Next week, horseman and stockman Martin Black out of Bruno, Idaho will be my guest. Be sure to join us right here, same time, same place. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.